On this day of discovery, from the land of the Bible, part 1 of a road tour of the Galilee. Galilee, the northern region of Israel where Jesus lived. Galilee, the lush mountains, valleys, and water sources where conquerors, kings, and prophets left their marks. Galilee still speaks to us today as part of the land and story of the Bible. Gateway to the Galilee, next on Day of Discovery. At the crossroads of the ancient world lies a small bridge of land connecting the continents of Africa, Asia, and Europe. According to the Bible, it remains the most significant location on Earth. Known for centuries as the Holy Land, these are the hills and valleys of Israel, the land of the Bible. Mark D. Hahn and Jimmy DeYoung have returned to this biblical landscape, as they often have, to explore one geographically distinct and historically important region known as the Galilee, the setting for many of the Bible's most significant events and unfolding stories. Because Jerusalem is the anchor point of the Holy Land, they begin this day's journey on the Mount of Olives, which rises to the east of the city's historic center.
In the Bible, when you read about the different sections in New Testament times, you read about Judea, Samaria, and the Galilee. Everything from Jerusalem south to the Red Sea would be the area of Judea. And then from Jerusalem north to Nazareth, you have Samaria. And from Nazareth north to the Lebanese border, you have the Galilee, the Lower Galilee, the Upper Galilee, with the Sea of Galilee over here and to the west, the Mediterranean, the Dead Sea here just outside of Jerusalem.
And we're headed today north. We're going to go out Route 1, hit Route 6, and then up to the Galilee. And as we do, we're actually going to be looking back in time to some of the people, the places, the events that make up it's the greatest story ever told.
We're going to have an opportunity to see much of this area, many places that'll be familiar to you as you hear about them, places you've read about in the Bible. For example, we'll stop at Megiddo. That was one of Solomon's chariot cities. It was on the trade route, the military route, leading out of Africa all the way over to Saudi Arabia, to Mecca. Then we'll make our way up to Mukaraka. Maybe you've never heard of that, but Mount Carmel, that's the location where the prophet Elijah challenged the prophets of Baal. And then, of course, concluding our journey today over in Nazareth, hometown of Jesus Christ for some 28 years.
Really, Jim, all the places, the people you're talking about are like chapters of the story of the Bible, the history of the Bible, which, like our own journey together, is going to have a beginning, a journey, and a destination. What do you say, Jim? Should we go?
I'm going to let you fold the map. I'm no good at that at all.
Today's modern highways in Israel tend to obscure the fact that they often follow roads that have existed for thousands of years. Those ancient paths crisscross this small strip of land on the eastern shore of the Mediterranean Sea that has, throughout most of human history, been merely the land between. The land between Africa, Asia, and Europe. The land between civilization's ancient superpowers, Egypt, Greece, Persia, and Rome. This region, known in pre-Roman ages as Canaan, was an area to be traveled through on the way to someplace else, until the God of a man named Abraham chose this land to tell the greatest story ever told. Only with the coming of the family of Abraham did the people of surrounding nations begin talking about astounding events that were happening here at the crossroads of the ancient world. Over the centuries that followed, this land bridge to other places became known by the remarkable events that occurred here. Here, according to the Bible, the Lord of an unlikely people showed himself to be the God of gods and the King of kings. Through a promised land, a chosen people, and a prophesied Messiah, the predicted blessing would come to all the nations of the world. And now, because of that still unfolding story, Jimmy and I headed north on the coastal plain, following one of antiquity's major interstate highways. This road came to be called the Via Maris, or the Way of the Sea. This was the most traveled Middle Eastern trade route in and out of Egypt. The first stop on our journey to the Galilee would be at a strategic intersection along the Via Maris, the fortress city of Megiddo. But in order to reach Megiddo, we had to first go through the gateway to the Galilee, a pass in the Mount Carmel range.
The Mount Carmel range rises fairly abruptly off of the plain and out of the Mediterranean Sea, about 1,700 feet. And it forces traffic off the coast and somehow through the range into the Jezreel Valley. There are actually three passes, a northern one, a southern one, fairly broad, but a bit out of the way if you want to go directly to Megiddo, which is where the route wants to go. The central pass, the Megiddo Pass, of the three, it's the most difficult, the narrowest at one point. The pass then opens up quite dramatically. Megiddo right at the point of it, the end of it. And it sits quite nicely on the edge of the valley.
We're here on the edge of the fertile fields of the Jezreel Valley, just outside of Tel Megiddo, ancient gates that would have led into the city. A tell because over 20 different civilizations have been built one upon the other. And this ancient city dates back even to the time of the conquest of the land, 3,500 years ago, when Joshua would have brought the children of Israel in to conquer the promised land. This was one of the over 30 city-states that Joshua would have captured. Later, Solomon fortified the city. He made it one of his chariot cities, one of three that would be on the trade route leading from Africa on into Asia and into the Far East. And then this particular location has been talked about over the centuries as the spot where the armies of the world will gather. This Tel Megiddo overlooks the Jezreel Valley, where that final battle will take place in the future at the time of the return of the Messiah.
You know, you could come to a site like this and say, what have you got? You've got an ancient gate, got stone, got rubble. When you open the pages of the Bible, you find that we also have here a stage for an unfolding drama. And it's far greater. This story is far greater than that of kings and of power, of struggle and control. All of this is simply staging for a much greater story of a king, a great God who was using the men and women of this place to show the whole world that there is a power, there's a source of life far greater than anything that a human king could hold.
And so, according to the first book of the Bible, it all began when God led one of history's most important people out of Babylonia to this region, the man Abraham and his wife Sarah. Here the God of Genesis announced his plan to bring blessing to the whole world through the descendants of this childless couple who had long since passed the normal age of parenting. As Jimmy and I drove away from Tel Megiddo, we wound up the Carmel Ridge from the floor of the Jezreel Valley. Because the geography has not changed much over the centuries, it was easy to imagine garrisons of soldiers camped here, and lone sentries posted among the rugged limestone rocks and woodlands overlooking these roads and trails. Here too are rich green meadows and woodlands, benefiting from the moisture-laden air that sweeps uphill from the Mediterranean Sea and condenses on the western slope. Arriving at the summit of Mount Carmel, we entered the courtyard of a church built to commemorate a battle not for land, but a spiritual battle for the hearts and minds of the people of Israel.
Here on one of the highest mountain peaks on Mount Carmel, top of a rooftop of a church looking out across the Jezreel Valley towards Mount Gilboa. There's Mount Moreh, Mount Tabor, and just in the foreground before Mount Tabor, city of Nazareth, hometown of Jesus Christ. This is at the head of the Jezreel Valley, looking between these mountain ranges. You can see from here to the north the Galilee. In fact, in the distance, even the top of Mount Hermon, the top of the upper Galilee, and down to the south towards Jerusalem, mountains of Samaria. As you make your way here to the other side of the rooftop, I believe it's probably the first time that I have ever seen from this vantage point the Mediterranean, so beautiful on this clear day. What a great, great place to be able to see, in fact, even the width of the state of Israel, from the Jordan Valley, the border to the east, all the way to the western border, located there at the Mediterranean Sea. A great vantage point to see this part of Israel, the beginnings of the Galilee.
From this vantage point, it's easy to see how the pass to Megiddo forms the Philistine gateway to the region of Galilee from the south. To the northwest is modern Akko, site of ancient Acre. It stood at the northern or Phoenician gateway to Galilee. Several miles to the east is the region's Jordan River gateway, providing access for monarchs, armies, and caravans coming up the King's Highway from Arabia through Edom, Moab, and Gilead, now modern Jordan. It's likely that this road is the one that the prophet Elijah traveled when he left his home in the hills of Gilead to deliver a message of judgment to Israel's king Ahab and his Phoenician queen Jezebel, a message that there would be no rain for 3.5 years. Expressing then the overriding story of the Bible, Elijah challenged their prophets and their god of thunder, called Baal, to a contest with the one true God.
The name of this location is Mukaraka, an Arabic name that actually translated means the Mount of Burning, traditional site where Elijah confronted the prophets of Baal. Jezreel is located out in the valley there. Ahab and Jezebel lived there, and she had housed and taken care of the prophets of Baal. And after 3.5 years of no rain, Ahab confronted the prophet Elijah, said, "Are you the one causing all the problems here in Israel?" Well, that led into a confrontation between the prophets of Baal and Elijah. Elijah allowing the prophets of Baal to set up their place of burning, to prepare their animal for the sacrifice, and to call upon their gods to bring down fire. After almost trying this all day long, they weren't able to have their gods respond to their request. Elijah then had everything removed, built his place of burning, had them soak it with 12 barrels of water, and then he called down fire from the heavens, devouring everything. The animal sacrifice, the stones, the water, everything. Right after that, Elijah told them to take the prophets of Baal down to the Kishon brook. And there, Elijah went down and killed all of these prophets of Baal.
If one stands at the site of Mukaraka, this site that Elijah, according to tradition, at least in terms of its location, challenged the priests of Baal and Asherah, it's a quite dramatic drop to the north. From Mukaraka, the hills just drop sharply down to what's called the Kishon Pass. In the Kishon Pass, in fact, according to the book of Kings. This is where Elijah killed the priests of Baal and Asherah. And it's not surprising if you understand that event in its historical context and geographical context, because Phoenicia of that time came from what is today Lebanon all the way down to Mount Carmel. And so the Kishon Pass was the passage, the link between Phoenicia and Israel. It's through the Kishon Pass that this Baal worship entered into Israel. So in this symbolic gesture, Elijah slays the priests of Baal and Asherah in this valley.
The distance from the top of Mount Carmel to the Kishon brook below is relatively short, but the route is steep. And in this beautiful light, in such a quiet setting, it's hard to imagine what happened near this spot. Elijah directing the execution of 400 prophets of Baal. And I try to imagine what was racing through the minds of the Israelites, having just witnessed fire coming down from heaven, burning up an entire water-soaked altar, rocks and all. And now they're standing here watching this execution. I wonder if they finally remembered why they were the chosen people, why they were brought to this promised land. I wonder if they remember that they were here to shine the light of the one true God, rather than to be conquered by the darkness of surrounding pagan culture. From the banks of the Kishon to the north side of the Jezreel Valley is a short and straight drive. From the valley floor to Nazareth, however, the road becomes a steep and winding way, no doubt retracing a trail long ago terraced by the hooves of untold numbers of sheep and goats with their attending shepherds. Moist air flowing across the plain of Akko from the sea also condenses on these slopes, covering the springtime hills with wildflowers and new grass.
Now, from the base of that valley, the hills rise up again. Not as high as Mount Carmel. These are lower-lying hills, but these low-lying hills form, in fact, what we call Lower Galilee, which are the same hills on which Nazareth sits.
Okay, get out. Good. It's busy. Sunday afternoon here in Nazareth. These are Christian families having a picnic on a beautiful day. Not a cloud in the sky, Jim. In fact, look, there's the moon up there. In the middle of the day, you can see the moon. Look at those little kids.
We're going to have a wonderful view from here at the Precipice. Up the
This
pathway
is
here.
the Mount of the Precipice. It's just outside of Nazareth, right, Jim?
Yes, it is.
This Nazareth Ridge runs due east and west. If you're interested in going from Egypt to Mesopotamia, then you want to go around this ridge. It's too high to go up and over. You can either go around it on the western side, most went around it on the eastern side, and then continue your journey. This ridge is fairly isolated, you might say, by itself. It sticks up by itself. Valleys north and south, low points east and west. It rises steeply enough out of the Jezreel Valley that you wanted to stay off of it, unless you live there, unless you were a local.
At the time of Jesus Christ 2,000 years ago, a little village of maybe 10 or 30 families, around 300, that would have lived in that city where the angel Gabriel appeared to Mary, told her she would have the Messiah, the Son of God, Jesus Christ. It was that same city that after the birth of the Messiah in Bethlehem and then a trip into Egypt for almost a year, Mary and Joseph would have brought their young son back to Nazareth. Beautiful view from here, top the Overlook, overlooking Nazareth, and in the valley below, the Jezreel Valley that extends all the way from the coast of Israel, the Mediterranean coast, across to the Jordan Valley. It's the lower border of the Galilee area.
Jesus, of course, grows up in Nazareth from the time he was maybe just old enough to walk until the time that he was, until the time was fulfilled, and his ministry would begin. Maybe altogether, 25 years? 28 years, something like that. And during those initial growing up years, they pass quickly in the gospel. We can only imagine what Jesus did. All sorts of things. In addition to just having a good time. walking among the hills and fields and valleys and so on. And he perches himself on the edge of the Jezreel Valley, at the edge of this Nazareth Ridge. It's quite a high precipice, a lookout, you might say. You can see forever from the top when the air is clear. Deep into Samaria, deep into Galilee, into Transjordan. Were it not for Mount Carmel, you could see the Mediterranean Sea. And as he looks into the Jezreel Valley, growing up as a kid, just out on a hike, going to Shabbat school, a religious education, knowing the stories of the past, his past, the Old Testament, recalling to mind over there on Mount Carmel where Elijah met, fought with, combated the prophets of Baal. Down at his feet he can see Mount Moreh and where the village of Shunem was, where Elisha went about doing good and raised a boy to life. The ministries of Elijah and Elisha very much just at his feet, you might say. Where Gideon fought a great battle against the Midianites, where Deborah and Barak fought battles against Sisera and Jabin, king of Hatzor. These great redemptive acts of God at his feet. And you wonder how, as he reflected on the stories as they were told in the Bible and on other stories told about them in the oral tradition, then going up and looking at the land and putting the pieces in place, how this helped to shape his understanding of who he was as he grew in wisdom and stature in the favor of God and man. How this energized his idea of Redeemer and Savior.
I can just imagine, as a teenager into his 20s, Jesus Christ, maybe standing here at this same spot, looking down in the Jezreel Valley, anticipating the future, what would happen when those armies of the world do gather for that final battle, the Battle of Armageddon.
Something else happened here in Nazareth that really reflects the theme of the whole great story of the Bible. Gospel writer Luke tells us that Jesus, as a young man, went into the synagogue here in Nazareth, opened up the scriptures, and the people had commented that he speaks with such grace and such wisdom. And yet he read the scriptures in such a way that he made the hometown people furious with him. And then the Gospel of Luke tells us that they actually became so angry that they brought him to a precipice of the city. Traditionally, this is called the Mount of Precipice. We don't know for sure that this was the place, but it would have been a place like this, where in their anger, the people rejected Jesus. They rejected any thought that he could possibly be the anointed Messiah of God. Tried to throw him over the cliff, but the text says that he avoided them and he made his way through them and avoided their anger. But that event, right here, somewhere in these hills of Nazareth, reflects a recurring theme of the Bible. And that's the theme of rejection. The great creator, the great king who made this world is seen as coming into this world. First, he comes into the lives of men and women and speaks to them through prophets. And over again, the stories that we've been talking about today as we visited these sites, these stories reflect men and women rejecting their king, their creator, their Lord. And right here in Nazareth, the gospel writer Luke says it was Jesus. And the New Testament says that this wasn't just a man. This was the creator himself, the king, stepping into his own world, and he was rejected. Happens over and over in the greatest story of human history.
And because God became man here, each generation has the same choice. As the Apostle John wrote, he was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who received him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision, or a husband's will, but born of God.
Why do visitors from all over the world come here to stare reflectively into the past and future of these hills, this shoreline, and this valley? What still unfolding story connects the names of Abraham and Jesus to an Israeli landscape that was known in antiquity as Galilee of the Gentiles, and in the predictions of Jewish prophets as the place where the armies of the earth would gather in one great end-time battle? Whether you visited this land for yourself or dreamed of doing so, we invite you to join us for a road tour of the land and amazing story of the Bible, the Lower Galilee, on this day of discovery. This is the land of the Bible, Galilee, today a popular vacation spot for modern Israelis and a magnet to visitors from around the world. Here, modern highways still follow the paths of ancient roads that once connected the continents of Africa, Asia, and Europe. Now, however, the horsepower of finely tuned engines replaces the footfall and clatter of Egyptian, Greek, and Roman chariots. Security has been a long-standing issue in the region. In ancient times, Assyrian and Babylonian armies invaded the land of Israel through this northern passage. Later, Arab Muslims, European Crusaders, and Turks clashed here. Today, the lakeshore city of Tiberias remains in the shadow of the looming and often contested Golan Heights on its eastern shore. And it is here on the shore of Lake Cana, or the Sea of Galilee as it is known in the Bible, that Mark DeHaan and Jimmy DeYoung are getting ready for a day in the Lower Galilee to revisit some of the most important chapters of the greatest story ever told.
You know what? Those gulls remind me of Lake Michigan.
Except we're here on the Sea of Galilee, just outside of Tiberias, getting ready for our trip today.
Got a clear morning.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Hey, you got the
Really is.
keys?
Certainly do. Would you
You
like
drive.
to drive?
No, you drive.
Okay. I tell you what, though, we better go over how we're going to make our journey here. Get the old faithful map out. Mart, do you? Yeah. Here we are. Now we're basically right here at Tiberias. Come down, start into the Jordan Valley going south.
Right. Okay.
Mm-hmm. This is where the Jordan River comes out, and this is the Jordan Valley. Make our way down here to the location of Mount Gilboa, actually the location where the first king of Israel, King Saul, and his 3 sons were killed by the Philistines. Then we turn right, go west. This is actually a strategic junction right here too, because you've got the Jordan Valley, you have the Jezreel Valley they come in perpendicular to each other. So we start west, we make our way over to Tel Jezreel, another king of Israel, Ahab. And you heard about Jezebel, haven't you?
I've heard about Jezebel.
Elijah and all the confrontation they had there. Then across the beautiful, fertile fields of the Jezreel Valley, up towards and then into the mountains of Nazareth, and then over here to Cana of Galilee. Then make our way across back towards Tiberias and come to the Arbel Pass. So beautiful as you enter into the Sea of Galilee.
Okay, and then back to Tiberias.
Yes,
right?
uh-huh.
Okay, and the reason we're doing this, because all of these events that Jim has just described are like chapters in a great story. And what's interesting about this story is that it's about a bigger story that's been lost. But right here in Israel, that story can be found. And Jim and I are going to walk with you through that unfolding great story of history today together. You ready?
Yes, sir.
Let's go for it.
You fold the map and I'll
Okay,
get ready
I
to
got it.
drive.
Because of Galilee's fertile land, its location at the crossroads of many ancient highways, and its great freshwater lake, it was always a strategic military hotspot for clashing nations and occupying armies. For that reason, it was known in Bible times as Galilee of the Gentiles, or Galilee of the Nations. This region was a place in Israel where breaking news would travel not only to Jewish homes, but to the outside world as well.
In terms of openness for people moving through, and so on, the Galilee is the best. That is to say, the Galilee has this great series of east-west, broad, flat, low valleys. Doorways, you might say, by which you can go from the sea route to the land route most easily, bypassing a lot of the obstacles. That happens to be the Galilee. In particular, it happens to be the Jezreel Valley, the great crossroads, you might say, of antiquity in this part of the world, and to a lesser extent, some of the other valleys of the Galilee. It's not an accident that Isaiah called this region in Isaiah 9, verse 1, the Galilee of the Gentiles, or the Galilee of the nations.
The name Galilee appears to come from a Hebrew word meaning to encircle. And we know it also from the Bible as being the Galilee of the Gentiles. And certainly in Jesus' day, Galilee was an area where there were a high population of Gentiles. This is essentially an area that is bordered by the Litani River in the north, which is in Lebanon, southern Lebanon today. At the southern end, you have the Jezreel Valley. On the west, you have the Mediterranean Sea. And on the east, you have the Jordan Valley. So these four main geographical features more or less outline the biblical Galilee. You can divide it easily into two portions. What's known as Upper Galilee, where all the elevations are 3,000 feet and higher, and Lower Galilee, where all the elevations are about 2,000 feet and lower. And in Lower Galilee, you have, for example, Nazareth, where Jesus grew up. And from Nazareth, you can look out over the hills and you can see really how low-lying these mountains are compared to the higher uplifted region of Upper Galilee beyond in the north. And on a clear day, you can see Upper Galilee from good points of view in Nazareth.
Biblically, the boundaries are a little bit more flexible, you might say, and they tend to ebb and flow depending on which local power happens to be here. In the time of the New Testament, the word Galilee was very specific. It was a district on the western side of the Sea of Galilee, including a very small portion of the Jezreel Valley, including a series of ridges going east and west, running north of the Jezreel Valley, or laying north of the Jezreel Valley, and some higher hills to the north of that, but did not include anything toward the coast. A district that was governed by a fellow named Herod Antipas. The district of Galilee is the way it's described technically in the Gospels.
We've come up from the Jordan Valley on our journey today, here to the mountain range known as Mount Gilboa, which is the border for the Jezreel Valley here in the southeastern section of it, where the Jordan Valley and the Jezreel Valley come together. On this mountain ridge, someplace along here, the Bible story that took place 3,000 years ago of the first king of Israel, King Saul, meeting his death when under attack from the Philistines. Here it was that King Saul, his 3 sons were killed. And later, the Philistines took them to the community down in the valley there, Kishon, and attached their bodies to the wall.
The Philistines had come all the way up through the Jezreel Valley to separate the northern and southern tribes of Israel and choke Israel, the northern and southern tribes, from each other, isolate them, and really take over the Egyptian presence that had been there previous, all the way to Beit Shan. And Beit Shan, a rather large Canaanite city-state, like Megiddo, by the way, lying right there where the Jezreel Valley system dumps out into the Rift Valley. In the time of the New Testament, it had a Hellenistic name, the site, Skytopolis, and was becoming a rather large and impressive Hellenistic Decapolis city with all the elements that you would have in Rome itself: theaters, cardos, hippodromes, Roman baths, columns, the whole bit.
It's interesting watching a little calf suckle from his mother here on the Gilboa range. If you think about it, the calf is sometimes smarter than we are. We can so easily forget who our provider is and our purpose for being here. In fact, that's what the story of the Bible is all about.
Saul and his sons lost their lives right around here somewhere. And why? Because they were part of a nation, part of a family that had forgotten the big story, where they had come from, why they were here, and where they were going. And the result was tragic. You have to ask the question, why does a good book tell us stories like this? I think it's because our source, our creator, wants us to sit and reflect, to live and to reflect about where we came from and what this journey called life is all about and where it's going. That's what the story of Saul and his death on Mount Gilboa is all about. He had forgotten the big story. He'd worshipped himself. He'd been far more concerned about protecting himself and trying to make provisions for his own rule than entrusting the God, the great king who had given him his position of leadership in Israel. These aren't just events. This is part of the greatest story ever told, and it's for us to reflect on what it all means for us.
While reflecting on the death of Saul and his sons here on the slopes of Gilboa, a group of Israeli mourners parked their cars along the road and gathered for the burial of a loved one. What kind of meaning was there in the life and death of the one being buried here today? As I watched the funeral procession form in the distance, it seemed like the reality of Saul's tragic death was being reenacted before us. While many years separated us from the death of the father and sons who died in this mountain, I knew I wasn't far removed from the same attitudes that brought Saul to such a bitter end.
The prophet Samuel said to Saul, "You have rejected the word of the Lord, and the Lord has rejected you from being king over Israel." 1 Samuel chapter 15.
Yes, in many ways what happened to Saul and his sons here on this mountain is a story about another family living a long time ago. And yet in the quiet of this Galilee overlook, I also sensed that what happened here was giving me today a vision of God and a new look into my own heart. From the Philistine killing fields of Mount Gilboa, Jimmy and I headed toward another overlook of the Jezreel Valley, the apparent location of history's last chapters in the final battle between the forces of good and evil, Armageddon.
The Jezreel Valley is a very expansive valley, very flat, tends to get waterlogged. Nowadays, the water is channeled, the valley is dried out to the extent that the whole thing can be used for agriculture. And even though it's the agricultural breadbasket of Israel today, we can say the same thing about biblical times. Even though all of it might not have been usable, enough of it was. In fact, King Herod appropriated the valley as his own estate, his own landed estate, in the time of the Gospels. He's the king. He can do what he wants. He takes the best.
It didn't take us long to descend from the wildflower-covered heights of Mount Gilboa to tell Jezreel lying on a low western spur of the mountain.
The point where the Jezreel Valley itself dumps out through the narrow pass down to Beit Shan is a strategic spot. There is a site there, an ancient site there called Jezreel, Tel Jezreel, the modern name. This is a juncture point, an important trade point as well. It was here that King Ahab built a palace for himself, a winter palace. The weather is nicer here than in his regular palace in the hill country of Samaria during the winter time. Built a nice fortified palace. People were attracted to the palace, started to live up next to it, and the town started to grow.
The dig taking place here has been a slow, painstaking effort to find physical links to the notorious Jewish King Ahab, who built his winter palace here. Ahab was one of the northern kings of Israel who ruled the regions of Samaria and Galilee after 10 of the northern tribes seceded from the southern kingdom of Judah. Today I have some of the same feelings about Ahab that I did standing on Gilboa. The biblical record tells us that Ahab did more to provoke the Lord, the God of Israel, to anger than did all of the kings of Israel before him. Ahab repeated the mistakes of Saul, and like the first king of Israel, brought pain and disgrace not only on himself, but on the family and nation that depended on him. Somewhere to the east of here in the mountains of Gilead, Ahab bled to death in battle. And right here in Jezreel, Jezebel, Ahab's Phoenician wife, came to her own terrible end, being thrown from the tower of their winter palace. As prophesied by Elijah, Jezebel's body literally went to the dogs. I'll have to admit it was much easier for Jimmy and me to reflect on how this fertile valley has been Israel's breadbasket since Bible times. The meaning for the Hebrew word Jezreel fits its setting. It means God will sow the seed. Not the fertility god Baal worshipped by Ahab and Jezebel, but rather the one true God, who in so many ways chose the region of the Galilee to reveal himself as the King of Kings.
This is a wheat field here in the Jezreel Valley, the arrowhead-shaped valley between the mountains of Gilboa and Carmel, mountains of Nazareth. In fact, the cities that surround this valley give the significance of how important this piece of real estate is. In biblical times, this was a crossroads for the travelers, the tradesmen, the military coming out of Egypt on their way to Mesopotamia. This actually is going to be the crossroads to the world, according to Bible prophecy. The book of Revelation talks about all the nations of the world gathered here in the Jezreel Valley for that battle of Armageddon.
The drive from Tel Jezreel to our next location in Lower Galilee was marked by contrast. Not only were we moving from the valley floor up into the hills, but now we were also moving across hundreds of years to the hometown of a far different kind of king. Road signs to our destination confirmed that we were driving into the hills of the hometown of Jesus of Nazareth. From hills that Jesus must have played on as a boy, we stared into the fertile and prophetically significant Jezreel Valley below. History, present, and future all merged here in ways far greater than I could absorb. What also impressed me was how different Nazareth was from the small village that Jesus had grown up in. Modern Nazareth had spread down its slopes to virtually encompass what used to be a separate town, the town of Cana.
This is the modern-day city of Cana, a Galilean village in the times of Jesus Christ, just down the slopes from Nazareth, west of Tiberias, where we started our journey this morning. The Bible records in the Gospel of John, chapter 2, a very famous wedding took place here. In fact, here in Cana of Galilee, there are several locations, the traditional sites for that wedding. Jesus Christ and his disciples visited that wedding here in Cana of Galilee.
We find Jesus opening his ministry at Cana. where he goes to a wedding. The site of Cana has been suggested to be in two different locations. You could say the church traditional site, where the Byzantine churches and so on were located, is on the slope of the Nazareth Ridge. The city of Cana is there today, a modern city called Cana. And the other possibility is just to tell, on not much excavation. Nobody lives there today. It's on the outside of a rather large Arab village, Kafar Manda.
It was here that Jesus Christ performed the first of many miracles during his public ministry. Jesus Christ and his disciples visited that wedding feast, the celebration going on here in Cana of Galilee, and he turned the water into wine. Cana of Galilee, famous for a very important wedding.
The nicest section of Lower Galilee, other than the sea itself, is a valley lying just north of the Nazareth Ridge. Today it's called the Beit Netofa Valley. It was centered around, you could say, centered around the city of Sepphoris in the time of the New Testament. Hanathon was the Old Testament site, gathering up the valley. And it's a valley mostly of towns and villages, agriculture, small village agriculture, that sort of thing. Jesus, as he would wander as a youth and as a young adult, probably not only gazed into the Jezreel Valley, but into this northern Beit Netofa Valley as well. We find him telling parables later on in life, many of which are centered on village life, agricultural life, a farmer sowing seed, village women looking for lost coins, that kind of thing, landed tenants, absentee landlords, those sorts of things. And all of that has a setting, you could say, in this Lower Galilee area and these agricultural valleys, the small towns.
As we leave behind our all too brief visit to Nazareth and Cana, the significance of what the gospel writers say happened here lingers. It was in Nazareth that Jesus grew up in obscurity. It was in Nazareth that he announced in the local synagogue that the long-awaited Messiah had come. And it was just down the road in Cana that, according to the gospel account, he did the first of so many miracles. Combined with the amazing claims he made about himself, those miracles led so many in his day to realize that madmen and liars don't heal shriveled legs or turn water into wine. From Cana, we drove east toward the Sea of Galilee, just one day's walk in Jesus' time, to our final destination, the Arbel Pass.
As one approaches the Arbel Pass from the direction of Nazareth, one has to keep in mind that to get down to the Sea of Galilee, you're going to drop down very deep in elevation, because the Sea of Galilee itself sits in a very deep trough known as the Jordan Valley, which is a part of the Great Syro-African Rift. So what that means is that you're going to be making a very dramatic drop down to the Sea of Galilee. And you see this as you approach the pass. You can, from the top, already see the hills of the Golan Heights in the distance, and you can see the big drop down to the Sea of Galilee.
We've come full circle today on our journey, starting on the shores of the Sea of Galilee, making our way south down the Jordan Valley to where the Jezreel Valley comes in to these two unique valleys here in the land of Israel, and then up to Mount Gilboa, the site where Saul met his death, his sons. Many locations as we travel through the Jezreel Valley, stopping there in the fertile fields, going over then to Cana of Galilee and the other sites that we were able to see as we've traveled together. Coming back now here to the Sea of Galilee. Sea of Galilee through the Arbel Pass behind me. Most likely the travel route that Jesus and his disciples would have made from Nazareth, his hometown, into the 3.5-year location of his public ministry there in Capernaum.
In many ways, the story of the Bible, the great story of history, is like a trip. As a beginning, as a journey, as an end. In the middle, there's a great sense of loss. And as we've seen today, as we've talked about some of the tragic moments of human history, we've also been reminded that it was moving toward a time when a man would walk through this valley, down to the shores of Galilee, called men and women to himself, to listen to him, to follow him. He's still doing it today. That story is not complete because there's still a promised restoration of all things, a return to Eden, and an invitation for each one of us to be a part of that happy ending. The choice is ours. We're still a part of that journey. We're still moving. Something for all of us to think about.
These gem blue waters lie farther below sea level than any other freshwater lake in the world. Glistening 640 feet below the shores of the Mediterranean, these waters have another distinction. Hundreds of years before Christ, the prophet Isaiah mysteriously linked this region to the long-awaited Messiah of Israel. According to the prophet, Galilee of the nations would see a great light. Explore the Sea of Galilee and consider the stories that have rippled from its shores to change the course of history. The land and story of the Bible, the Sea of Galilee, on this day of discovery. This is the land of the Bible. Resting among the hills of northern Israel, the shores of Galilee wrap around a large freshwater lake that has had an important place in the history of the Middle East. Lying on a major trade route between Europe, Asia, and Africa, the shores of Galilee provided a much anticipated rest stop for merchant caravans and marching armies. The lake itself has been worked by professional fishermen for thousands of years. In the 1st century, over 16 small man-made harbors were strung around its 33-mile shoreline. Today, only a handful remain active. A major landing on the lake is at the city of Tiberias, where early in the morning, one can still witness an ancient activity, the offloading of the night's catch of fish. Day of Discovery's Mark DeHaan was eager to join Jimmy DeYoung on the docks as they prepared for their 3rd day in a 4-day tour of the Galilee region.
Hey, Jim. Hey, good morning.
Good morning.
How you doing?
Boker Tov.
Boker Tov to you, too.
Thank you
Good
very
to see you,
much.
man.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I want to show you something. I got down here a little early.
Yes.
See this right here?
Now tell me what that means, Mark. Oh, just by the fish.
What kind of fish is that?
Looks like a shark
Yeah,
to me.
Yeah, right here in Galilee.
No,
Yeah,
sharks in the
look here.
Galilee.
Look here. How is
Oh,
that
man,
for a
look
day's...
at that catch.
How is that for a
Hi,
day?
guys. Catch last night.
Come on around over here.
Great catch.
This is Moshiko,
Hey, Moshe. Jimmy.
and
good
your
to see
name
you.
is
Elon.
Elon. Jimmy,
Good to see you. Good to
tell
see
us about the catch. Now, you love gefilte fish,
you.
right?
I love gefilte fish.
Which one is? You were telling me before,
The
Moshe,
fish for gefilte fish.
make these into gefilte
Name
fish.
is it's called the campion.
It's called
carp?
a carp. Called a carpion, carpion or carp.
Yeah. And those are the buoy.
Bully? You say bully.
Buoy, buoy.
Buoy.
With R.
With buoy. Okay, with R.
Yes, it's a very tasty fish on the grill.
Okay.
And which one, is there one that's called the St. Peter's fish here?
St. Peter's fish, I don't know, I think the buoy.
Okay, buoy. Buoy. Okay, I
Mark,
got it now.
This
yes,
one's
sir.
looking at me.
This.
trying to
Watch-
say
watch-
something.
Watch this. Can I pick it up?
Yeah.
All right.
Oh, man.
All right, huh?
That's, I think, about 22 slices of gefilte fish. Got any horseradish with it? I'm ready to go.
There, you brought in a couple. They're guys, big ones this morning too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Think
Okay,
we do,
thanks
do
so
that
much.
good a catch if we go out today?
No, we're not going to try. Thanks. I won't shake your hand. I got fish all over me. Okay, thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Okay, now, the guys have been talking about whether or not to
Yeah.
go out today. Tell me, you've checked the weather?
Yeah, look at the sky.
Yeah, it's broken. It's
To the
cloudy.
east, it's really cloudy. It's starting to break up here in the west, and that's where the weather comes from. So I guess it's, I'm not sure.
Well, I heard too.
50-50.
We talked to the boat owner. They've lined up a couple of fishing boats for us today, and we want to see Galilee from a different point of view. We want to do it from the inside and to follow the shoreline. And what we've been told is we've got weather until about 2 o'clock, we think, and then the rain is supposed to move in.
We better probably get started.
Unlike the Dead Sea to its south, about 90 miles south, which is pushing 40% salt content, the Sea of Galilee is just nice fresh water, wonderful water. Fed primarily by the Jordan River itself as it enters in from the north. Exits from the south, the water's moving, fresh, nice, clean, and pure, and great for fishing, as we read in the Gospels. A number of fish native to the lakes. Most are kosher, a few are not. And we can track fishermen around the sea. Didn't matter if your heart and your worldview faced Rome or Jerusalem. If you were a villager around the sea, you probably fished. Your economic lifestyle was very much the same.
Being eager to get out on the water, our Day of Discovery crew wedged ourselves around piles of fishing nets still wet from the night's work. And almost immediately, the nets, the smell of the fish, the sights and sounds of the water took our thoughts back to another day, when Jesus of Nazareth had asked a group of professional fishermen from the shores of this lake to leave their nets and follow him. We had come as countless others before us to reflect on the teaching, the miracles, and the world-changing influence of the nearly 3 years that Jesus and his fishermen disciples had spent in the lakeside communities of the Galilee.
We left Tiberias and we're traveling along the shoreline of the Sea of Galilee. We'll be here in the northern portion of the Sea of Galilee today, traveling to some of the sites familiar to you possibly if you've read the record of Jesus and his disciples, traveling on the shores of the Sea of Galilee to the different cities found there in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Magdala will be our first stop. Then we'll make our way over to the location where the Sermon on the Mount took place, the Mount of Beatitudes. From there to the actual headquarters for Jesus Christ during his 3.5 years of public ministry, the city of Capernaum. Then to the northern tip of the Sea of Galilee, where the Jordan River makes its way here into these waters. And finally over to Bethsaida, where Jesus Christ fed the 5,000.
Jim, there's something about being with the nets in this fishing boat that reminds us that these are real people with a real story. But what's important about them is the way they fit the great drama of history that played out here on this stage at the crossroads of the world. It's all put together so strategically. When we read the book, we tend to see men and women, and it's even possible to lose the big picture. But the shoreline of Galilee, just props. Props in the greatest story ever told. And we're gonna track back through history as we visit these sites today together.
If you stand back and look at a topographical map of the Sea of Galilee, it looks a little bit like somebody took Play-Doh and then their thumb and impressed it straight in. The hills drop off quite dramatically, sort of rounded as they go in. The sea is surrounded by a series of hills. All of them are basalt. This is the outflow of lava in the prehistoric past into the Rift Valley. The lava didn't quite flow all the way to fill the valley. The sea is what's left. There's a Rift Valley, then the Jordan Valley coming in from the south, going out of the north, although the north has been plugged a bit by an upswelling of basalt. So if you look south out of the sea, you see the valley, the Rift Valley, the Jordan Valley. If you look north, you don't. You see a plug. North of it is another valley, the extension of the rift, a little bit further north.
On the shoreline behind me is Magdala. Actually, that name of that community comes from the Hebrew word migdal, which means tower. The fishermen had a tower here, and they would look out on the Sea of Galilee to find where the school of fish were and then send their boats out to catch the fish. You might remember a very famous Mary that was from Magdala, Mary Magdalene, part of the personalities found here on the Sea of Galilee.
Now, I love the story of Mary. Mary of Magdala lived right here in this community. What we know about Mary is that she had a rough start. According to the New Testament, Mary was tormented by 7 demons. She lived here in the depths and the shadows of life. And what's so amazing is she lived at the foot of one of the most beautiful scenic overlooks of the whole region. She would have looked up at Mount Arbel. From there you can see the whole region of the Galilee. And then one day, Mary met a person, a man, who gave her life, gave her deliverance, gave her hope. And from that point on, she gave her life to him, to the one who gave her, even walking at this level, a view, a scenic overview of life that now made her life worth living. And what's important about Mary, it's not just about her. From beginning to end, the story of the Bible, the great story of history, of our history, is that throughout time there have been individuals at the end of themselves, broken, in despair, tormented, controlled by forces beyond themselves. And then they found the one who gave them life in the first place, and then gave them faith, gave them hope, gave them the ability to see the big picture.
I've been on a lot of lakes over the years, but it was pretty amazing to be staring at a shoreline that once heard voices talking about miracles of a teacher who had the attention not only of religious leaders, but of common fishermen and crowds that were following him. And according to the gospel writer John, it all played out right here on these shores.
Boats came from Tiberias, near the place where they ate bread after the Lord had given thanks. When the people therefore saw that Jesus was not there, nor his disciples, they also got into boats and came to Capernaum, seeking Jesus. And when they found him on the other side of the sea, they said to him, "Rabbi, when did you come here?" Jesus answered them and said, "Most assuredly I say to you, you seek me not because you saw the signs, but because you ate of the loaves and were filled. Do not labor for the food which perishes, but for the food which endures to everlasting life, which the Son of Man will give you, because God the Father has set his seal on him." Then they said to him, "What shall we do, that we may work the works of God?" Jesus answered and said to them, "This is the work of God, that you believe in him whom he sent." John chapter 6.
The Sea of Galilee is the lowest freshwater lake on the face of the earth, 640 feet below sea level. Now, because it sits in this trough of the Jordan Valley, part of the Great Syro-African Rift, you have dramatic rises of mountains to the west and to the east. The mountains to the west are the mountains of Galilee. The mountains to the east are the Golan Heights. So, in fact, the Sea of Galilee is framed in this trough by these two mountains. Now, the lake itself is, if you look at a map or look at an aerial view of the lake, you'll see that it's shaped something like a harp. And some have suggested that the name of this lake in Galilee in Hebrew, which is Kinneret, may be related to either its shape or perhaps even to the sound of the waters lapping on the seashore. But Kinneret, the Hebrew name for the Sea of Galilee, does in some way seems to be linked to a musical instrument.
Behind the trees now lining this shore lie the ruins of an old fish tower. This ancient lookout is a reminder of the fishing industry that was once more active in Magdala than it is today. And it was here on the northern rim of the lake that Jesus called his first disciples, asking them to leave secure professions to spread the good news that the long-awaited Messiah and kingdom of God was at hand.
Jesus, walking by the Sea of Galilee, saw two brothers, Simon called Peter and Andrew his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. Then he said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." They immediately left their nets and followed him. Going on from there, he saw two other brothers, James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brother, in the boat with Zebedee their father, mending their nets. He called them, and immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. And Jesus went about all Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the gospel of the kingdom, and healing all kinds of sickness and all kinds of disease among the people. Matthew chapter 4.
And as we continue our journey along the shores of the Sea of Galilee, we move north and to the east to this high spot here at the northern end of the Sea of Galilee, the traditional site for the Sermon on the Mount of Beatitudes. They tell us that those slopes leading up to that grove of trees where the church is located just above those red-roofed homes, acoustically is the best spot here in the northern end of the Sea of Galilee for Jesus to have preached that message. Thousands would have gathered, sitting on those slopes and listening to Jesus give a sermon that would help these Galileans know how to live life.
Here, somewhere in these hills, thousands were encouraged to do unto others as they would want done to themselves. And now today, people all over the world talk and write about what those fishermen and their families heard with their own ears and saw with their own eyes.
The sign at the entrance of Capernaum says hometown of Jesus. That probably could better be stated the home base of Jesus for 3.5 years of his public life. It was here in Capernaum where he trained men, fishermen that he had called right here on the shores of Capernaum to be fishers of men. It was also here on this international trade route, a highway that led from Egypt over to Mesopotamia, where Matthew could have been a tax collector. Jesus called Matthew as well to join him in this 3.5 years of training to send these men around the world with the gospel message.
The water is so quiet right now as we sit just outside of Capernaum. You can hear the birds singing. The bougainvillea behind us is beautiful. You see the ruins of the ancient synagogue in which Jesus would have taught. We expected the weather to turn, but the front hasn't moved in yet, and right now the water is so calm. It reminds me there was another side to Capernaum. In fact, the gospel writer Matthew, who was called right from a tax booth here at Capernaum, quoted Jesus as saying that because of all the miracles that were done here, on the day of judgment, it would actually be more tolerable and better for Sodom and Gomorrah than for the people of Capernaum, because he said they saw all of the miracles and yet they rejected the light. Now, what's that all about? But it takes us back to the big story, the huge drama that was playing out right here on these shores, on this trade route. Way back to the beginning, the Creator himself spoke to his people that he had made, and they rejected him. From generation to generation, they rejected the light they were given. And never did the light shine brighter than here in Capernaum, where all these miracles were done, where literally the great champion of history, the hero of history, the Savior, walked into here, and yet according to the gospel, was rejected.
When one crosses the upper Jordan River, the river that feeds the northern end of the Sea of Galilee, one is doing two things. They're first of all crossing actual boundary or territory between two tetrarchies. The tetrarchy of Herod Antipas, the tetrarch of Galilee, and that of Philip, who controlled essentially the area known today as the Golan Heights, and also the area of Bethsaida and the plain of Bethsaida. So crossing the river will take you right onto the plain of Bethsaida, which is mentioned, of course, in the context of the Bible with the miraculous feeding of the crowds as Jesus preached to them. Continuing across the plain of Bethsaida and bypassing the city itself, one comes to the eastern side of the lake.
This is the Jordan River coming down from the north and entering the northern end of the Sea of Galilee. Almost directly south from this point is the exit of the Jordan River, making its way down to the Dead Sea. There's a nautical term that is used to describe crossing over the Sea of Galilee. You extend an imaginary line from here at the northern entrance of the Jordan to the southern exit, and that imaginary line divides the Sea of Galilee from the west and the east. In the Bible, when it talks about Jesus Christ and his disciples leaving Capernaum and crossing over the Sea of Galilee to Bethsaida, it's referring to leaving that area on the western shore, going to the eastern shore, into the area of Bethsaida, where the feeding of the 5,000 took place.
Bethsaida was another busy fishing community in the first century. Some wonder why Jesus chose fishermen as his first disciples. My guess is that he wanted us to see what he could do with common people living on the edge of ever-changing waters.
These calm waters here at the northern end of the Sea of Galilee can be very deceptive. Late in the afternoon, throughout the evening, and into the night, the winds can come down through the Arbel Pass and cause the waves to rage here in this location. In fact, it was earlier today that we received a warning, the possibility of storms coming up late this afternoon here in the Sea of Galilee. We've been traveling throughout the day. We were quite concerned about what we may be facing. It was a time similar to this, 2,000 years ago, according to the Bible, after Jesus had fed 5,000 on the slopes just over the area of Bethsaida. He told his disciples to get in the boat, cross over to Capernaum. He went on the slopes and started to pray, knowing that he was sending these men that he's been training for 3.5 years into the storm. The storm came up. The disciples were very much concerned, and then all of a sudden, they saw Jesus Christ walking across the water. Got in the boat, calmed the storm. They made their way on over to Capernaum.
They got into the boat and went over the sea toward Capernaum, and it was already dark, and Jesus had not come to them. Then the sea arose because a great wind was blowing. So when they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and drawing near the boat, and they were afraid. But he said to them, "It is I, do not be afraid." Then they willingly received him into the boat, and immediately the boat was at the land where they were going. John chapter 6.
I've been sitting here trying to imagine what those men must have thought when those raging waves suddenly stopped at the voice of their teacher. That may have scared them more than the waves themselves. They must have said, what kind of a person is this? And maybe you say, it's just a story. But it's a story linked to a whole series of events linked to the man and to the men and women who walked these shores in the first century. It wasn't just a storm that suddenly quieted, but there were shriveled legs, body parts that suddenly were made whole at the word of this teacher, Jesus of Nazareth. Blind eyes, people who hadn't seen for years, suddenly there was light. This man could take a little bit of bread and a few fish and break them and feed 5,000 people with it. You say it's not possible. Well, it's not unless you put these stories of the gospel accounts into the big story of history, the story of the Bible. The book tells us that in the beginning, there was a great creator who said, "Let there be light." He made a man and a woman. They second-guessed their creator. Tragic mistake. There was a death in the family. The whole family became a rebel family. But the creator kept pursuing them. That's what all the stories, all the accounts of the Hebrew scriptures are all about. He kept pursuing them, and he kept promising, "I'm going to send my anointed one, my king, to deliver you." And then one day, a man, a rabbi, a miracle worker, a gracious man, full of wisdom, full of power, began changing the lives of men and women of this community. And there were Gentiles around as well. This was Galilee of the Gentiles. What was happening? The great story of history was playing out in fulfillment of all that the prophets had said.
In the New Testament letter to the Hebrews, we read, "God, who at various times and in various ways spoke in time past to the fathers by the prophets, has in these last days spoken to us by his Son, whom he has appointed heir of all things, through whom also he made the worlds, who being the brightness of his glory and the express image of his person, and upholding all things by the word of his power, when he had by himself purged our sins, sat down at the right hand of the majesty on high."
Next, a road tour of the land and story of the Bible. Explore with us the northern region of Israel, from the shores of a great freshwater lake to the base of a 9,000-foot snow-covered peak. Many believe this mountain provided the setting for one of the most dramatic events of history. Discover more of the land and story of the Bible in the Upper Galilee on this day of discovery. This is the land of the Bible. Since 1948, a restored nation of Israel welcomes visitors to a land of extremes. Sandy Mediterranean beaches and rocky hilltops, fertile valleys and arid deserts, treeless wilderness regions and forested mountainsides. Here within the boundaries of Israel, we find the deepest dry valleys on earth, the salty sands of the Dead Sea, and the rocky shores of the freshwater Sea of Galilee. Yet rising from the northern border of Israel is the eastern Mediterranean's highest mountain, Mount Hermon. Here too we find a land in the middle. Winding around and through these diverse features were some of antiquity's oldest and busiest highways, connecting Africa, Asia, and Europe. On modern versions of those same roads and lines of communication, Day of Discovery's Marty Hahn and Jimmy DeYoung explore the region of Upper Galilee and its role in what has been called the greatest story ever told.
Hey, Jim, look here.
What do you got?
We're walking 1.3 miles an hour. Walk a little faster. Come on. 1.4, 1.8 miles an hour.
Look.
And you know what? You know what?
What?
There are right now 10 satellites in the sky getting an exact reading on our coordinates.
Does it show where
We're
we
standing
are?
right here. We're pointing just a
Where
little
that little
bit.
arrow is?
Yeah, and look at just a little bit northeast.
Uh-huh.
And if we move like this, it shows that we're moving to the west. Look at that. It's got us marked on
Is
here.
that another one of your toys?
No, it's not a toy. We know exactly
Well,
where we
it looks
are.
like a toy to me because I don't see the Sea of Galilee on there. And there's the Sea of Galilee right there to our right.
There's one problem. The detailed information map
Yes.
I've got for back home in the States.
Like I've got the detailed information.
I just don't
from
have
the
it.
landmarks.
I don't have it here.
Let me
in
just show
Israel.
you. From the landmarks, notice. That's Arbel Pass. That is the trade route dating back 4,000 years ago, coming through the Nazareth Pass as we make our way through the Galilee and up the northern part of the
I know which
Jordan
way is north.
Valley.
I know
You
which
can
way is
get that
north.
one. But then this landmark gives us another landmark, the Sea of Galilee. We skirt the northwestern shore of the Sea of Galilee. Then we're going to make our way north up through the Galilee to Hatzor along that old trade route, an ancient trade route that 4,000 years ago they were able to navigate without a, what is that called?
GPS, Jim, GPS. 10 satellites. I got your exact coordinates right now.
We'll go to Hatzor, and that's an area of a fortress that was captured and then burned by Joshua during the conquest of the land. After that, to the northern border of Israel, we'll visit the site where an ancient Israeli king established and erected an altar and put up an idolatrous golden calf. Then before returning here to Tiberias on the Sea of Galilee, we'll go over to Caesarea Philippi, where Jesus heard Peter make his now famous confession of faith. Going to be a great day through the Northern Valley.
And you know what? As we go, we're going to be doing what hundreds of thousands of people have done down through history, and that's follow the tracks of the men and women of the Bible, the greatest story of history playing out on an international stage here in Israel, which amounts to the crossroads of the world. Come with us.
Every season of the year offers memorable experiences for the traveler. But for me, there's something special about springtime in Israel. Fed by winter rains, the grasses have grown tall. Wildflowers cover the hills. Almond and fruit trees are in full blossom. And great storks migrating from Africa to the north circle in the sky overhead. These birds are not following man-made maps, but some mysterious directional system that preceded our own GPS instruments by thousands of years. And yet the abundance of water, broad fields, sheltering trees, and secluded heights used by these migrating birds also made the Upper Galilee a desirable place for ancient travelers. This region was so desirable, in fact, that ancient superpowers fought over these roads and resources for centuries. And then, according to the Bible, the God of a chosen people chose this strategic landscape for his purposes.
North of the Sea of Galilee, we have a rise of basalt, an upswelling of basalt, rather significant. It provided a quiet place for Jesus to get up to and pray in the early mornings and overlook this world at his feet, by the way. This world that represented everything the Mediterranean world would represent for the apostles as they took the gospel ministry from the one sea to the other. But up and over this upswelling of basalt, down the other side, we drop then into another very nice valley. In fact, it could be argued it's the most fertile of all because of the climate, because of the wonderful water resources coming in off of the springs of Mount Hermon, the Hula Basin. At its southern and southwestern corner, the city of Hatzor, another large ancient Canaanite city-state equal to Megiddo and Beit Shan in its size and presence.
This is Tel Hatzor, located here in the northern Galilee of modern-day Israel. It's an archaeological dig. A tell is a mound upon which civilizations are built. In fact, one of the layers here at Tel Hatzor, they found evidence of that civilization and the city at that time being burned. That go along with the biblical record that tells us Joshua captured this Canaanite stronghold and then burned the city. 500 years later, King Solomon selected Hatzor as one of his 3 chariot cities, Gezer, Megiddo, and here at Hatzor. He selected this particular location because it was here that the pass narrowed, and Hatzor, located atop this mountain peak, could guard the international trade route that's been there for 4,000 years, collecting taxes and duty. But also, it was very strategic to stopping any invading army from the north that would attack the Israelites. Tel Hatzor, here in the Galilee.
Even Hatzor is referred to in the Bible as the head of all those kingdoms in the time of Joshua. From there, one can continue north if they wish into Lebanon, or they can go northeast across the Golan Heights towards Damascus. And indeed, this was one route that many would take that were on their way to Mesopotamia, because the quickest way would be to go across the Golan Heights to Damascus and then on to Mesopotamia.
When I wander the ruins of a city like this, I'm reminded that, according to the Hebrew Scriptures, the God of the people of Israel was using the descendants of Abraham to secure this land for himself. From the history of Moses to the predictions of Jewish prophets, the Scriptures point to a God intent on revealing his purposes and promises, not just to Israel, but to the whole world.
One of the things that's interesting at an ancient site like this is that the ground is literally littered with shards, fragments of pottery, ancient pieces of life that are now broken and cast aside. Anybody could find those shards, those fragments at a site like this. It's interesting, if you look at them, think about, here's a piece with a rim. You can see the rim, an ancient, probably bowl, some kind of pottery. And I found these 2 pieces actually fit together. Got the line of the edge here, and with a little imagination, there's even some script here. Either a script or a gouge. But in some ways, pieces of pottery, shards, remind us that there once was a whole. There was a whole thing that has now been lost. That's a lot like the events that we've been talking about, that Jim has summarized. Fragments, pieces of people's lives that are part of individual stories that together form the big picture. That's the great thing about the Bible. It gives us history that allows us to look at the fragments of our life, and then helps us to put it together, to see the big picture of what we're all looking for. We're all looking for significance. We're looking for security, looking for satisfaction. Significance comes from why we're here. Where did we come from? Security, the people here at Hatzor, people living in ancient Israel, all the time concerned about how to protect themselves and provide for themselves in the face of enemies. It's no different for us today. People living with limited resources, people with lives that are fragmented by trouble, and all needing to see the big picture, the grand scope of history that gives us a sense of significance and security, shows us where to find satisfaction.
This region of Upper Galilee is part of the land and story of the Bible. From Abraham to the disciples of Jesus, Men and women of the Old and New Testaments experienced the same annual cycles of nature that visitors to the land now experience. North of the Sea of Galilee in the spring, the prophets and kings of Israel saw the Jordan River become like a mountain stream swollen with melting snow. Here, people, now enshrined in the pages of Scripture, knew the river that would annually course down from the eastern mountain range that forms a natural boundary between Lebanon and Syria. For centuries, these waters filled a swampy basin, today known as the Hula Valley, created by a lava dam that blocked the path of the Jordan until it was able to eventually find a few breaks in the rock and continue south.
The very fact that you had a very swampy lake nearby Hatzor in this basin of the Hula Valley may also relate to events we read about in the Bible and maybe never even think so much about. For example, when Jesus is at Capernaum and he heals Peter's mother-in-law, who has some sort of an illness that many doctors have said might be malaria. The source of this malaria could have been Lake Hula. As one would walk north along the upper Hula Valley, the upper Jordan Valley, past Hatzor, one would certainly be impressed by the rise of Upper Galilee to the west, where the elevations are all 3,000 feet and higher. And you also have to the east the rise of the Golan Heights. Very, very flat top because of lava flows that make it so flat on top. Now, as one passes through this trough, on a clear day from Hatzor, they would already be able to see Mount Hermon off in the distance. A very high mountain, over 9,000 feet, covered with snow most of the year round.
We've come the 17 miles from Hatzor here to Dan. It was the northernmost city in the Old Testament for the children of Israel. In fact, when the ancient writers of the Scriptures wanted to refer to Israel from north to south, they would say from Dan to Beersheba. One of the 12 tribes of Israel, the tribe of Dan, driven out of their allocation, their inheritance in the south of Samaria, made their way to this region and in fact gave their name to the entire region. Eventually, they erected an idolatrous altar here at Dan, which has plagued the children of Israel down through the years. In fact, this stainless steel structure represents an altar that Jeroboam erected a golden calf on. Jeroboam was the leader of the 10 tribes that separated from the 2 tribes in the south, Judah, after the division of the 12 tribes. Here at Dan, he established a worship center so the 10 tribes in the north would not have to return to Jerusalem to worship. Dan is symbolic of the northern border of the state of Israel today, as well as it was in Bible times. It actually was a gateway for the enemies of Israel to make their way down to Jerusalem.
The city of Dan is located along the foothills of Mount Hermon. Here, 900 years before Christ, the unfolding story of the Bible took a tragic turn. After the death of Solomon, Israel divided, and the first king of the north, a man named Jeroboam, erected golden calves of worship at altars here at Dan and also at Bethel. Jeroboam's purpose was to keep his people from following their hearts back to the temple and God of Jerusalem. So these ruins echo today with the words of judgment. Judgment coming from the broken heart of a God who has nothing but the faithfulness and the trust of his people. The prophet Jeremiah spoke for God in some of the Old Testament's most touching language.
A voice declares from Dan and proclaims affliction from Mount Ephraim. O my soul, I am pained in my very heart. My heart makes a noise in me. I cannot hold my peace, because you have heard, O my soul, the sound of the trumpet, the alarm of war. Destruction upon destruction is cried, for the whole land is plundered. My people are foolish, they have not known me. They are silly children, and they have no understanding. They are wise to do evil, but to do good they have no knowledge. Jeremiah chapter 4.
standing here by one of the water sources for the River Jordan, coming out of Mount Hermon, the northeastern area of modern-day Israel. I'm standing in Caesarea Philippi. It's a New Testament town. In fact, Herod the Great's son Philip built Caesarea Philippi and named it after the Roman Emperor Caesar. Caesarea Philippi is where Jesus brought his disciples after feeding the 4,000 somewhere in the region of the Sea of Galilee. But 25 miles, as the crow would fly, here to the northeastern section of Israel.
Having visited this site, it's easy to understand how ancient idol worshippers felt compelled to honor their gods here. The forces of nature in this place are impressive. A huge snow-capped mountain yielding up massive amounts of pure fresh water is so rare in the Middle East that the ancients had to be impressed. They saw nature's raw power on display here, and without the knowledge of the one true God, they would have been tempted to worship what was obviously greater than they were. In the Apostle Paul's letter to Roman Christians, he speaks of a people who first fail to honor what they know about God, and then they become ungrateful toward the one who has given them all that they have. Eventually, they become so blind that they even fail to see their own Creator and begin to worship the creation itself, making little gods of material things, and then foolishly honoring them as deities. And it was somewhere near here, this idolatrous region of Caesarea Philippi, where Jesus tested his disciples' understanding of the one true God and of his promised Messiah.
When Jesus asked his disciples, "Who do men say that I am?" the now famous statement was made by the Apostle Peter, "Thou art the Christ, the Son of God, the Messiah." It was soon after that that Jesus told his disciples about the church of the future. And then he also told them that he would have to go to Jerusalem to suffer. He would die, be buried, but he would resurrect. 6 days after that, here in this same region, in the foothills of Mount Hermon, he would take the inner circle, Peter, James, and John, up onto Mount Hermon, and the transfiguration would take place, all in this region of Caesarea Philippi in the northern Galilee.
Now after 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John his brother, led them up on a high mountain by themselves, and he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. A bright cloud overshadowed them, and suddenly a voice came out of the cloud saying, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Hear him." Matthew chapter 17.
I find the thought compelling. Here at the foot of this mountain, worshippers bowing down before man-made statues, lifting them up and erecting them in niches of the rock, and somewhere above, probably here on the slopes of Mount Hermon, 3 of Jesus' disciples witnessing an event that they would never forget.
This has to be one of the most interesting places in all of Israel, with the waters rushing off of Mount Hermon, cold, clear spring waters, and behind me this impressive, enormous rock face. I'm sure that everyone who visits here is impressed with the sounds and the enormity of this rock. And yet if we were to back off a few miles and put it all in perspective, realize that behind this rock is the whole Mount Hermon mountain range. You can't see it from here, but it's there. And I think in some ways that's what Peter's confession was like. In the big picture, in this unfolding drama of history, it's happening right here in this region. The light breaks through. Jesus asks his men this enormous question that really all of us have to consider. Who was he? Who was this man? Peter says, "You're the Messiah. the Son of the living God? And Jesus responds, flesh and blood didn't reveal this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. We hear those words, we know they're significant, because Christ's own response and his explanation, we sense, is significant. But behind it are even greater events. The unfolding drama is about to move to Jerusalem with the climax of the most important event of history yet to come.
And that climax of the greatest story ever told was the death and resurrection of Jesus. Events which together formed evidence of the mercy and love of God that enabled the disciples of Jesus to bring his offer of salvation and forgiveness even to the very people who once worshipped their idols here.
Once again, we've come full circle, leaving this morning from the shores of the Sea of Galilee, up that trade route that dates back over 4,000 years to Hatzor, one of the chariot cities of Solomon. Then over to Dan, the location where Jeroboam, the leader of the 10 tribes known as Israel, after they had divided from the 2 southern tribes, established an idolatrous worship center. Over to Caesarea Philippi, and the very famous statement by Peter, his confession of faith, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. Now back here to the shores of the Sea of Galilee. A day of traveling through history, traveling through biblical history, and once again returning to our starting point from this morning.
Hey Jim, I got us.
You got us.
Yeah, I got us again. Look at here.
You're not bringing that gadget
Yeah,
out
look at
again.
this. Look at this.
Look,
I got north. I got
all
north.
the landmarks led us where we went today. Every single one. Forget that satellite. 10 satellites, huh?
But let me tell you something. There is something about a global positioning satellite that is important. If you're lost, and you have one, and it's working, it does allow you to orient yourself. It helps you to find out where's north and where are you in relation to the right direction. And I think in many ways that's what happened up at Caesarea Philippi is all about. If the rabbi from Nazareth, when he said to Peter, flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who's in heaven, if he was representing the Father and telling the truth, and if Peter was right when he said, others are calling you Elijah back from the dead, Jeremiah back from the dead, or one of the prophets, but I can see that you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. If he was right, and I'll tell you what that does for me. It helps to orient me. If I know that Jesus represents God, if I know that he speaks in behalf of the Creator, then that tells me that every way in which I move in his direction, that makes sense. That's bringing things together. If I move away from him, then I'm going to run into the same kind of problems that we saw play out over and over again in the story of the Old Testament, at Hatzor, at the different locations we've been. It all comes together. If you can orient yourself, if you know where you are, you know where you've come from, you know where you're going, you know where you are presently, then you can begin to put together where you are in relation to the big picture.